What happens when humanity's greatest archaeological discovery becomes its most terrifying mistake? Deep beneath the Mediterranean, Dr. Kenji Tanaka thought he was restoring an ancient Greek clockwork marvel. Instead, he activated a 2,000-year-old warning beacon. The message it broadcast across the cosmos wasn't meant for the stars. It was meant for Earth's first inhabitants, the ones who fled 66 million years ago when the dinosaurs died. Now they know their homeworld is occupied, and they're coming back. The sea was a kilometer deep here, a crushing, silent, absolute black. Inside the titanium sphere of the submersible Triton, the only light came from the instrument panels and the powerful external LEDs that cut a cone of swirling particulates from the abyss. It was a world of pure physics, a place of pressure gradients and sonar returns, and that was the only part of it that held any interest for Dr. Kenji Tanaka. He sat slightly apart from the others, his gaze fixed on a tablet displaying the sub-S life support and power diagnostics. Every hum of the carbon dioxide scrubbers, every fluctuation in the battery output was a clean, solvable problem. He tracked them with a kind of detached satisfaction. "Incredible," Dr. Alara Vance murmured, her face close to the thick acrylic viewport. "Look at that debris field, Marco. The amphorae are almost completely intact. Roman, 1st century BCE, probably a merchant vessel running wine and olive oil from Rhodes." The pilot, Marco, grunted an affirmative, his hands steady on the controls. Alara's enthusiasm was a constant, radiating through the cramped cockpit like heat. She saw history, narrative, a human story in every broken pot and waterlogged timber scattered on the seabed. Kenji saw only variables. He saw decay. He saw the inevitable, predictable march of entropy that reduced all things to mud and memory. He was here because the Triton was a masterpiece of modern engineering, and Alara S. Grant paid handsomely for the best engineer to keep her state-of-the-art toy running. The past was her department. His was making sure they all had a future. "Bring us closer to that cluster on the port side," Alara instructed, her voice alive with discovery. "Gently now." Kenji sighed under his breath, his thumb swiping through a power consumption report. Another 20 minutes spent cataloguing pottery shards. He had already run a full diagnostic on the manipulator arm, a delicate and complex piece of machinery he'd calibrated himself. He just wanted them to use it so he could collect the performance data and move on. The sub glided over the skeletal remains of the ship's hull. The manipulator arm, a multi-jointed extension of metallic grace, descended toward a pile of sea-crusted objects. "There," Alara said, pointing. "That lump, the one that looks like a rock. Sonar density is off. It's not stone." Kenji glanced up, annoyed. A deviation from the dive plan. Unscheduled variables were inefficient. "Alara, the manifest is for ceramics, and maybe some statuary. That is a concretion, a lump of corroded metal and seabed fused together." "Humor me, Kenji," she said, not taking her eyes off the object. "Let us just get a look." Marco expertly maneuvered the arm, its delicate pincers closing around the formless mass. As the arm lifted, the strain was too much for the calcified crust. A large chunk sheared away, tumbling in slow motion through the water and exposing what lay beneath. For a moment, it didn't register. The submersible S-lights caught something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't the dull green of corroded bronze. It was a glint of sharp, defined angles, a flash of impossibly intricate concentric gears, meshed together in a way that spoke of breathtaking precision. They were a mechanical fossil, preserved in a way that defied the 2,000 years of crushing, corrosive darkness. Alara gasped, a sharp, choked sound of pure astonishment. "My God," Marco swore softly. Kenji's annoyance evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp jolt of cognitive dissonance. His fingers stopped moving over his tablet. The gears were too small, the teeth too uniform. His mind, an engine of logic and mechanics, immediately started calculating tolerances, gear ratios, the shear, mind-bending complexity of creating such an object without modern tools. He leaned forward, his face close to the viewport for the first time all day, his eyes narrowed in a way that had nothing to do with boredom. The dispassionate engineer was gone. The pragmatist had just been confronted by an artifact that violated his sense of order. That night, back on the research vessel Helios, the object sat in a climate-controlled conservation tank, bathed in a sterile, filtered light. Kenji stood before it, alone in the quiet of the lab. The concretion was now a patient, and he was its surgeon. On a nearby monitor, he'd pulled up the academic file on the Antikythera Mechanism, the name given to the artifact when it was first discovered over a century ago. He scanned the papers, his lips curled in a slight sneer. A simple calendrical device, a crude astrolabe. He scoffed at the low-resolution X-rays from 1901, black and white smudges that hinted at the shape within, but revealed nothing of its soul. They were looking at it with the tools of their time, and so they saw a crude reflection of their own technology. They saw what they expected to see. He turned to his own terminal. His high-resolution terahertz scanner was a world away from their primitive X-rays. It could peel back the layers of corrosion and time, digitizing every single gear tooth, every hidden pin, every inscribed marking, without ever touching the object. He initiated a deep scan, and a holographic model began to render in the air beside him. It was not a simple calendar. It was a universe. Layers of interlocking gears, epicyclic trains, differential systems so complex he had to run the numbers twice to believe them. The official count was 30-something gears. His scanner was already past 70 and still descending into its core. The public-facing theories were a joke, a children's story told to explain something the original researchers simply couldn't comprehend. This device wasn't just predicting the position of the sun and moon. It was modeling the irregular motion of the moon using a system of genius that wouldn't be invented by European clockmakers for another 1,500 years. He zoomed in on a section of the holographic model, tracing the path of a gear train with his finger. It was a testament to a level of genius that had been lost, a scientific peak that humanity had fallen from, only to spend the next 2 millennia struggling to climb back. He felt a surge of pride, not in the ancients, but in himself, in his technology. He was the one who could finally give these forgotten creators their due. He could resurrect their masterpiece. He looked from his incredible scanner to the artifact floating in its tank. They had no idea, he whispered to the silent lab. No idea at all. Later, in the quiet solitude of his cabin, the ship's gentle rocking a familiar cradle, Kenji opened a video link. A small face, bright with life, popped onto his screen. "Daddy!" A genuine, unguarded smile transformed Kenji's weary features. "Hey kiddo, what's that you've got?" His daughter, Hana, held up a complex construction of interlocking plastic blocks. It was a chaotic, multicolored tower with articulated arms and spinning pieces. "It is a space station. See? This part is the docking bay, and this is the solar sail, and it spins when you turn this gear here," she demonstrated, and a section of the tower dutifully rotated. Kenji felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling cleaner and more satisfying than solving any engineering problem. On his small desk, a framed photo showed the two of them at a science museum, their faces illuminated by the glow of a planetarium display. "That's amazing, Hana," he said, his voice soft. "You're a natural engineer," she beamed. "See?" he continued, leaning into the screen. "Human ingenuity, kiddo. If we can think it, we can build it. There's no mystery we can solve." It was his core belief, the principle he lived by, and the lesson he most wanted to teach her. The world was a complex machine, yes, but it was an understandable one, a knowable one. And the Antikythera Mechanism back in the lab was the ultimate proof. A puzzle box, built by human hands, waiting for a human mind to finally, truly solve it. He was sure of it. The restoration of the mechanism became Kenji's entire world. For 3 weeks, the conservation lab was a sterile sanctuary of focused, relentless work. He moved with the unhurried precision of a bomb disposal expert, his every action deliberate and measured. This was the scientific method made manifest. The act of breaking a universe down into its constituent atoms to understand the laws that governed it. He deployed an arsenal of modern marvels, a micro-abrasive jet firing a stream of powdered sodium bicarbonate no thicker than a human hair, gently stripped away 2,000 years of oceanic crust from the delicate bronze gears. Chemical baths, their pH levels controlled to the millionth decimal, dissolved the calcified deposits without harming the metal beneath. In the air around him, holographic projections bloomed and shifted three-dimensional models of the 82 fragments, color-coded and annotated. He spent hours in this digital space, rotating the ghostly gears, testing their fit, his hands conducting a symphony of light. Elara would often stand in the doorway, watching in quiet admiration. "It's like watching a watchmaker build a galaxy," she said one afternoon. Kenji didn't look up from a fragment he was analyzing under a digital microscope. "It's all just math, Elara," he replied, his voice calm and authoritative. "What makes it beautiful is its predictability. This gear," he pointed a laser at a specific point on the hologram, "has 235 teeth, an unusual prime number. The designer used it to accurately model the synodic period of the moon. It wasn't magic, it was genius. The kind of genius that leaves its calculations behind for anyone smart enough to follow them. He was charting a map of a great, ancient mind, and he was confident he was the first person in 2 millennia to truly appreciate its contours. He was building a perfect, rational model, and soon he would prove it to the world." The moment of truth arrived late one night, under the quiet hum of the Lab's climate control. Kenji had finished the physical assembly of the main gear train, mounting the delicate bronze wheels onto a modern, low-friction armature. He had fashioned a replica of the original hand crank. With a deep breath, he took the crank and gave it a slow, steady turn. There was a soft, satisfying click. Then another. The gears, silent for millennia, began to move. They meshed with a whisper-quiet perfection that sent a shiver of pure intellectual pleasure down Kenji's spine. It worked. On the main face of the device, the pointers for the sun and moon began to trace their elegant paths through the zodiac. The pointers for Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn followed suit. It was a clockwork solar system, a perfect microcosm of the heavens as the Greeks knew them. A triumphant smile touched Kenji's lips. He had done it. He had resurrected it. He continued to turn the crank, watching the dance of the cosmos play out. Then he saw it. A smaller pointer, one he had assumed was merely decorative or perhaps damaged, suddenly clicked forward. It moved with the same mechanical certainty as the others, but it settled on a position within the starfield engravings that made no sense. It wasn't pointing to a known planet or a significant star. It was indicating a small, unfamiliar grouping of 7 stars nestled between the known constellations of Lyra and Hercules. Kenji's smile faltered. He stopped cranking. That constellation didn't exist. It wasn't on any Greek, Babylonian, or Egyptian star chart. He checked his holographic assembly, running a diagnostic. No errors. He checked the original fragments for damage that could cause a gear to slip. Nothing. He ran the mathematical models again, convinced he must have made an error in his own calculations. The math was sound. The pointer was exactly where the gears told it to be. He stood back, a deep frown creasing his brow. The elation of moments before had curdled into a cold, irritating knot of confusion. It was an error. It had to be. It was the only logical explanation. The next day in the ship's mess hall, he pushed a fork through his food, his mind still cycling through the problem. Elara sat opposite him, her tablet displaying a composite image of the mechanism's faceplate. "A phantom constellation," she said, her voice laced with wonder, not concern. "Fascinating." "It's a flaw," Kenji stated flatly. "A gear tooth was worn down during the shipwreck, or there was slippage in the main axle. I'll find it. It's a mechanical ghost, nothing more. Ilara looked up from her tablet. Or, she began gently, what if the map isn't wrong? The device is far older than the shipwreck. What if it's a map of a sky we no longer see? Or from a different time? She swiped on her tablet, showing him ancient Babylonian boundary stones covered in celestial symbols. The sky changes, Kenji. Civilizations rise and fall. What if it's just from somewhere else? Kenji put his fork down and gave her a look of weary condescension. Somewhere else? Ilara, they were brilliant engineers, but they were Greeks, not Gallifreyans. They lived in the Aegean, not on another planet. The explanation isn't out there, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling. It's in here. He tapped his temple with his index finger. It's a problem of logic and mechanics. To suggest otherwise is just superstition dressed up as archaeology. He picked up his fork and went back to his meal. The conversation, as far as he was concerned, was over. That night, Kenji was determined to find the flaw, to hunt down the ghost in his machine. He ran the scanner over the final, deepest layers of the mechanism's core, the parts he hadn't yet physically disassembled. He was looking for a cracked gear, a bent axle, the single rational source of his phantom constellation. The scan was almost complete when the system flagged an anomaly. It wasn't a gear. It was a space, a cavity, a perfectly symmetrical sealed compartment deep within the bronze heart of the device. His pulse quickened. He focused the scanner, increasing the resolution. The image resolved on his screen. Inside the hidden chamber lay a single object. It was dark, smooth, and ovoid, roughly the size of a pigeon's egg. It was a metal. Its mineral composition matched nothing in any geological database. It seemed to drink the scanner's energy, to absorb the light, revealing almost nothing of its internal structure. An obsessive, all-consuming need to understand seized him. This was the key. This was the source of the error. Driven by an impulse that was pure scientific curiosity, he bypassed the lab's safety protocols and deployed a microprobe, a needle-thin filament capable of delivering a precise electrical charge. He would test the object's conductivity, gather some basic data. That was all. The probe touched the dark crystal. Kenji sent a single, low-voltage pulse through the filament. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the object began to glow. It started as a faint, ember-like glimmer from within, which rapidly bloomed into a soft, steady, golden light. Kenji snatched the probe back, his eyes wide. The light wasn't reflecting, it was emanating from the crystal itself. It flowed out into a series of microscopic channels etched into the surrounding bronze, channels he hadn't seen before. The golden light spread through the entire mechanism like blood through veins. With a low, resonant hum, the device came to life. The gears began to turn, smoothly, silently, and entirely on their own. Kenji stared, his hands frozen in the air, his clinical detachment, his professional certainty, his entire rational world shattering in the silent, golden glow of an impossible machine. The golden light from the crystal pulsed once, and the low hum from the mechanism deepened into a steady, resonant tone. Then, from the flat, engraved surface of the device, light bloomed. It wasn't a simple glow, it was a projection, a shimmering, three-dimensional image that coalesced in the center of the lab. Gasps echoed through the room as crew members, drawn by the commotion, crowded into the doorway. It was a star chart, a perfect rotating sphere of light, dotted with the familiar constellations of the local galactic neighborhood. Earth, the Sun, the planets of the solar system were all there, rendered in breathtaking detail. Ilara stood mesmerized, her hands clasped to her mouth. It's a celestial orrery, she breathed, but holographic. Kenji, however, was not mesmerized. He was frantic. This was impossible. This broke the laws of physics. His mind, a fortress of rationalism, was being shelled into rubble. He grabbed a handheld sensor and began circling the projection, his movements jerky and desperate. He scanned for light sources, for lenses, for magnetic field emitters. There was nothing. The light was originating from the bronze device itself, without any discernible hardware to create such an image. "It can't be," he muttered, running a hand through his hair, his voice tight with rising panic. "There's no projector. There are no components for this. It's not possible." His eyes darted across the holographic map. His scientific mind, even in its terror, couldn't stop analyzing the data. He recognized the star patterns, the galactic clusters, but then he saw something else. A thin, red line of light, a trajectory, was plotted on the map. It wasn't a planetary orbit. It was an interstellar path, originating from a system deep within the Bota's void, a vast celestial desert, infamous among astronomers for its shocking emptiness. Modern telescopes showed nothing there. No stars, no galaxies, nothing. Yet on this 2,000-year-old map, a path was clearly drawn from its barren heart, leading directly to Earth. The human genius theory didn't just feel wrong anymore. It felt like a childish fantasy, a comforting lie he had told himself before the monster under the bed revealed itself to be real. He fled the lab, the awed murmurs of the crew ringing in his ears. He stumbled into his cabin and slammed the door, his back pressing against it as he gasped for air. His ordered world, a world built on the bedrock of predictable, repeatable phenomena, had been liquidated in a matter of minutes. Through his porthole, the impossible golden glow from the lab painted the night sea. His gaze fell on the framed photo of his daughter, Hannah, on his desk. Her smiling face, once a source of warmth and motivation, now felt like an accusation. The worldview he had promised her that the universe was a solvable puzzle was a fraud. He had been teaching her a faith, and its God had just been proven false. He collapsed into his chair, snatching up his tablet. His fingers flew across the screen, his mind grasping for any lifeline in the sea of the impossible. He pulled up every fringe theory he had ever dismissed. Wormhole metrics, quantum entanglement on a macro scale, string theory, M theory. He plugged the device S energy signature into every complex equation he could find. Nothing worked. No known model of physics could account for a 2,000-year-old bronze box projecting a stable hologram and plotting a course from a place that didn't exist. He was a mathematician without numbers, a cartographer whose maps had all turned to smoke. The core fear of every true scientist, to be confronted with the genuinely irrational, the unsolvable, had become his reality. He was adrift. Back in the lab, the awe had been replaced by a tense, nervous energy. As the crew stared at the impossible map, the device S hum began to pulse. A young communications officer, listening on a broad-spectrum radio receiver, suddenly tore off his headphones. "Sir," he shouted, his eyes wide. "I've got a signal." All heads turned to him. "It's coming from the device," he stammered. "Low-frequency radio. It's broadcasting." He quickly tapped at his console, isolating the frequency. "It's directional. A tight beam transmission. Sir, it's aimed precisely at the coordinates in the Bota's void." The air in the room grew cold. It wasn't just a map. It was a call. A message sent across unimaginable distances to a specific, invisible point in space. The sound, patched through the Labes speakers, was a complex, rhythmic sequence of tones and clicks. It wasn't noise. It was structured. It was a language of pure logic. The ship's captain, a stern, pragmatic man named Evan Rostova, stormed onto the bridge a few minutes later. He had a face that looked like it was carved from granite, and a demeanor to match. "What in God's name is going on in your lab, Dr. Vance?" he demanded. "Captain, it's the greatest discovery in human history," Alara began, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's an unknown technology of unknown origin, broadcasting an unknown signal to an unknown recipient." Rostova cut her off, his voice like ice. "In my book, that doesn't make it a discovery. That makes it a security risk, A threat. He turned his gaze on Kenji, who had just returned to the lab, his face pale and drawn. "Dr. Tanaka, you are the chief engineer of this expedition. You are a man of science and systems. I am ordering you to shut it down. Pull the plug, now." Alara looked at Kenji, her expression pleading. "Kenji, we can't. This is first contact." Rostovus' eyes bored into him. "Doctor, shut it down." Kenji stood frozen between them. His scientific imperative, the very core of his being, screamed at him to follow the data, to analyze the signal, to pursue the truth no matter the cost. His duty as a crew member, his ingrained sense of rational risk assessment, sided with the captain. He was trapped between two opposing forms of logic, and his choice would define everything that happened next. Kenji walked slowly toward the device, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't look at Alara or at the security camera that was broadcasting to the bridge. He sat at his terminal, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Initiating power down sequence," he said, his voice flat and robotic. On the bridge, Captain Rostova watched the monitor, nodding once in grim approval as the holographic map flickered. The golden light in the lab dimmed. The pulsing hum faded into silence. The map vanished. But in the lab, Kenji's expression was not one of relief. It was one of pained, terrifying determination. The shutdown was a sham. He had created a false feedback loop for the security feed, while shunting the device to an isolated closed power circuit, drawing energy directly from the ship as secondary generator. He had rerouted the broadcast feed, every single rhythmic pulse, to a private, encrypted server bank. He had made his choice. He put on a pair of headphones, cutting himself off from the world. On his screen, the signal's complex waveform scrolled by, a river of impossible data. He leaned in closer, his old life, his old beliefs, his old self, all burned away in the golden glow. He was no longer a skeptic. He was a believer, and he was listening to a ghost calling home. For days, the conservation lab became a clandestine world unto itself. Kenji and Alara worked in a state of shared obsessive secrecy, fueled by black coffee and the terrifying gravity of the signal that pulsed on Kenji's private server. The man who had once scoffed at unscheduled deviations now lived his life by them, catching a few hours of sleep only when his body threatened to shut down completely. He was gaunt. His eyes were bloodshot, but they burned with a new kind of fire, the fire of the converted. On the lab's main screen, the signal was no longer an elegant, scrolling waveform. It was a tapestry. They had broken it down into its constituent parts, discovering it wasn't an auditory language at all, but a visual one, encoded in rhythmic pulses of data. It was a series of images, of diagrams, of pure information. "It's not a greeting," Kenji said, his voice raspy from exhaustion. He pointed to a sequence that had repeated thousands of times at the start of the broadcast. "It's a key, a primer. It is teaching us how to read the rest." He isolated one of the symbols. It was a spiraling ladder, unmistakable to any biologist on the planet. "A double helix," Alara whispered, her voice filled with awe. Kenji isolated another symbol, a nucleus circled by orbiting electrons. "The Bohr model of a hydrogen atom," he confirmed. Another showed the elemental composition of their own sun. It was a Rosetta Stone written in the universal language of science. The creators had assumed that any civilization capable of detecting their signal would have already discovered the fundamental laws of physics and biology. It was a message designed to be understood by their scientific peers, a conversation across an impossible gulf of time. Kenji's scientific knowledge, the worldview that had been so brutally shattered, was now being reforged. It was no longer a shield against the unknown, but the only tool that could possibly interpret it. But while science was blooming in the lab, fear was taking root in the rest of the ship. The crew, kept in the dark about the true nature of the discovery, could feel the change in atmosphere. They saw the locked doors, the exhausted, secretive looks on the faces of the two lead scientists. They only knew that an artifact from the deep was doing something unnatural, and it was setting everyone on edge. One night, as Kenji was heading back from a rare trip to the mess hall, he was cornered in a narrow corridor by a junior engineer named Miller. Miller was pale, his eyes wide and feverish. "You have to stop," Miller hissed, blocking Kenji's path. "That thing you found, it's not right. It's unnatural." "Miller, it's a scientific marvel," Kenji began, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's a curse," Miller shot back, his voice trembling. "My grandfather was a sailor from the old country. He had stories about things from the deep, things that sleep, things that you don't wake up." Kenji tried to reason with him, to explain the mathematical beauty of the signal, the logic of the language, but his words were useless. Miller wasn't afraid of a complex machine. He was afraid of a monster. He was in the grip of a primal, superstitious terror that logic could not touch. Kenji brushed past him, unsettled by the raw fear in the young man's eyes. He was working late in the lab when an alarm, triggered by the lab's motion sensors, blared on his terminal. He raced from his office to the main conservation room to find Miller standing over the mechanism, a fire axe raised high above his head. "It has to be destroyed," Miller screamed, his face a mask of terror and righteousness. "It's calling them! Can't you hear it?" Before Miller could bring the axe down, Kenji launched himself forward, tackling the engineer at the knees. They crashed to the floor. The axe skittered away, clanging against a metal bulkhead. Miller was wiry and strong with fear, flailing and kicking. They grappled on the floor, a chaotic, desperate struggle. And in that moment, Kenji realized the profound, insane irony of it all. He, the man of pure reason, was now throwing punches to physically protect an impossible, supernatural artifact from a man driven mad by superstition. He was fighting to protect the very thing that had destroyed his world. After Miller was subdued and locked in the brig, a shaken Elara returned to the lab. While Kenji had been fighting Miller, she had been fighting the signal. "I found something," she said, her voice quiet but electric. "A timestamp. It's woven into the primer, referenced against pulsar timings. It's incredibly precise." Kenji came to her side, his breathing still ragged. On the screen was a date. It meant nothing to him at first, just a long string of numbers. "It's a date from the past," Elara explained, her fingers flying across her own terminal, pulling up geological and paleontological databases, approximately 66 million years ago. The number hung in the air. Kenji's blood ran cold. He knew that date. Every scientist knew that date. Elara found the cross-reference she was looking for. Her face went white. She looked up at Kenji. "Chicxulub," she whispered. "The asteroid impact, the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event. The day the dinosaurs died." The realization washed over them, a wave of stunning, terrifying clarity. The signal wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a call for help. It was a recording. A monument. A final message left behind by a civilization that had fled their home planet Earth millions of years ago, escaping a cataclysm. The mechanism was an automated buoy, a warning left behind for anyone who might stumble upon their ghost world. The creators weren't aliens from a distant star. They were the first Terrans. As Kenji and Elara stood frozen, trying to process a revelation that rewrote the entire history of life on their planet, a klaxon suddenly blared from the comms panel. A red light flashed insistently. "Incoming transmission!" the monitor read. "Source unknown!" Before they could react, the mechanism on its pedestal whirred loudly, its gears clicking and reconfiguring at a furious pace. The golden light inside the crystal flared, brighter than ever. The holographic map of the galaxy blazed back into existence in the center of the lab. But the map was different. There was a new trajectory plotted in a searing, angry red. It was a path entering Earth's solar system. The device hadn't just been broadcasting a warning. It had been listening, listening for an echo, a reply, a sign that its millennia-long vigil was over. And their activation of it, its powerful tight beam broadcast, was the sign. They hadn't just found a history book. They had rung a dinner bell across the cosmos. On the far wall of the lab, the device projected a new image. It wasn't a star or a symbol. It was a countdown timer, written in the cold, precise mathematical language of its creators. The numbers ticking down with relentless precision from 24 hours. The warning buoy had just told someone the coast was clear, and they were coming home. The bridge of the Helios descended into managed chaos. The countdown timer from the lab was now displayed on the main view screen, each descending number a hammer blow to the crew's composure. Captain Rostova was barking orders, his face a grim mask of military resolve. "I want a torpedo targeted on the wreck site," he commanded the weapons officer. "We'll use a deep water charge. It'll vaporize the artifact and everything around it. We erase the signal at its source." "You can tee," Ilara pleaded, her face pale with horror. "This is history. It's everything. We have to warn people, tell the world what is coming." Rostova shot her a withering glare. "And start a global panic? Anarchy? No, we contain this. We cut the head off the snake." As the argument raged, Kenji stepped onto the bridge. A profound calm had settled over him, the kind of stillness that comes after a hurricane has passed and leveled everything you once knew. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it no longer controlled him. He had passed through the fire and had been forged into something new. "We do neither," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise. Rostova and Ilara both turned to him. "Destroying it is a fool's errand," Kenji continued, his gaze steady. "The signal has already been answered. The echo is already on its way. And warning humanity, what would we tell them? That our ancestors are returning and we have no idea what they want?" He shook his head. "Hiding in fear is what they did. They ran from the fire. We can make the same mistake." He looked from the Captain's fearful pragmatism to Ilara's scientific idealism. "We can run and we can hide. We have to do what they couldn't. We have to reply." Kenji worked with a feverish intensity that bordered on inhuman. He was no longer trying to understand the machine. He was teaching it a new language. His fingers danced across holographic interfaces, writing code not for a computer, but for the crystal heart of the alien device. He was reprogramming the broadcast. "They left a warning buoy," he explained to Ilara, who was frantically feeding him data, acting as his research assistant. "We resending back a status report." It was the most ambitious act of his life. He wasn't just sending back a simple hello or a plea for mercy. He was taking the fundamental principles of the creator's language, the language of science, and using it to build a monument of his own. He encoded a compressed data stream of humanity, its entire existence. He poured everything in: Newton's laws and Einstein's relativity, the structure of DNA, the sound of a symphony, the architecture of a cathedral, the poetry of Shakespeare, the horrors of our wars, the beauty of our art, the depths of our philosophies. He was sending them the sum of what we were: a brilliant, violent, beautiful and contradictory species, a species that now occupied their homeworld. As the final piece of the data packet, he uploaded a single high-resolution image. It was the photo from his desk of him and Hana at the museum, their faces full of wonder. It was his signature, his proof of life. It was a message that was both a greeting and a defiant statement. This planet is occupied. This was no longer just science. It was an act of faith, a prayer broadcast into the void, a final desperate hope that intelligence, somewhere in the universe, might value truth. With less than a minute on the clock, the crew of the Helios gathered on the deck, their faces turned toward the dark water, as if expecting to see a monster rise from the depths. They watched the countdown on a large monitor. 10, 9, 8. The ship's main lights flickered and dimmed as the ancient device drew an immense amount of power directly from the vessel's core, a parasite draining its host for one final act. 7, 6, 5. The air crackled with static electricity. 4, 3, 2, 1. The countdown hit 0. For a single silent heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the sea began to glow. From the depths below the ship, a brilliant column of golden light erupted, piercing the surface of the ocean without a sound. It wasn't a violent explosion, but a serene, focused beam of pure energy that shot upward, past the ship, through the clouds, and into the blackness of space. For a few seconds, it connected the Earth to the stars, a shining pillar of impossible technology. And then, as silently as it appeared, it vanished. In the lab, the device fell silent, its golden light extinguished forever. On the comms panel, the incoming signal from deep space ceased. There was only the sound of the wind and the waves. Silence. Weeks later, Kenji and Alara sat at a long, polished table in a secure, windowless conference room. Before them sat a panel of 3 stern-faced individuals in dark suits, the kind of people who didn't have names, only titles. The inert, dead artifact sat on a trolley beside them, a lump of silent bronze. Kenji had presented everything: his logs, the data, the recording of the signal, the energy readings. The lead official, a man with cold, dismissive eyes, a classic establishment gatekeeper, folded his hands. "Dr. Tanaka," the official said, his voice flat, "what you and your team experienced was undoubtedly traumatic. However, the official finding is that a documented, though unusually strong, solar flare interacted with the unique metallic properties of the meteorite you recovered. This interaction caused the energy discharge you witnessed, as well as a period of intense electromagnetic interference that resulted in shared auditory and visual hallucinations. A textbook case of deep-sea psychosis." He pushed a thick document and 2 pens across the table. "You will sign this non-disclosure agreement. For your own well-being and for national security, this event never happened." Kenji looked at the man, a perfect embodiment of the scientific dogma he himself had once championed. He had irrefutable proof of the most important event in human history, and it was being dismissed with a condescending pat on the head. He was now the prophet, and this was the new Church of Science, casting him out as a heretic. He picked up the pen and signed his name. Months later, on a clear, cool night, Kenji stood in his backyard with Hana. They were looking up at the sky through a small telescope he had bought her. "Daddy," she asked, her eye pressed to the eyepiece, "are aliens real?" Kenji smiled, a sad, wise expression on his face. He thought of the empty throne of a lost civilization and the prayer he had sent into the dark. "The universe is a lot bigger and more complicated than we can imagine, kiddo," he said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "But it's not empty." He adjusted the telescope, pointing it toward the northern sky. "Look there," he said, guiding her gaze. "That's the Botas constellation." Hana looked, seeing only a familiar pattern of stars, but Kenji saw something else. He saw the vast, dark emptiness between them, the celestial desert that wasn't a desert at all. He no longer saw it as a void. He saw it as a silence. A question he had answered, and a reply he would wait for the rest of his life. What's so fascinating about this story is how it takes our hero, the scientist Dr. Kenji Tanaka, on a complete cyclical journey of belief. He begins as the ultimate skeptic, a man who trusts only in observable data and the power of his tools to make sense of any mystery. His faith isn't in a god, but in the scientific method itself. But when he's confronted by something truly impossible, something that shatters every known law of physics, he doesn't just break. The most interesting part is what he does next. He doesn't abandon his scientific mind, he elevates it. He uses his incredible technical skills to perform what can only be described as an act of faith. compiling all of humanity into a single data packet and broadcasting it as a prayer into the void. He synthesizes logic and hope, and the ultimate irony. After this profound journey, the scientific establishment he once belonged to dismisses his world-altering experience with a clinical, condescending diagnosis: deep-sea psychosis. The man of proof is left with a truth he can no longer prove, turning him into a prophet in a world that only trusts in facts. It leaves you wondering about the nature of truth itself. So, I'll ask you, if you were in his shoes and the only person who truly understood what happened was you, would you trust your own incredible experience, or would you accept the rational, official story and try to forget?